Hello, hello. It's officially New Year's Day. Today, we're going to be talking about the LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans. Now, I have talked about the city of New Orleans. I can't remember if it's on this podcast or my Dark Academia Queen podcast, but here on Down the Rabbit Hole, we like to talk about many topics. We just got done with our history segment, which I love doing, by the way. Do not get me started. I am a huge history nut. But we're gonna go to the haunted LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans. Now I've never been to New Orleans. I would love to go. Now, so the Gaylord Opryland, which I do plan on talking about a little bit later, but there's this area in there that has like this whole New Orleans whole setup that I just love, and I do recommend going if you're ever in Nashville. It's truly it's for free to go to, so I do there's a secret to parking where you don't have to pay, but I will not give you that. You can private message me for that, and I will let you know. Now, um, well, if you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, please subscribe. So today we're going to be talking about one of the most visited homes in New Orleans today. Um, so here's the thing. There is no doubt that we've all heard of LaLaurie Mansion. It is one of the most popular stops on the New Orleans ghost tours. If sometimes people in the city won't even call it that, choosing to refer to it as 1140 Royal Street as the haunted house instead. And the fact is that in New Orleans, the location is much more notorious, and the majority of filming happened at the Harmon Grimmer House on St. Louis Street, probably for the best because, as people have claimed, that the mansion is cursed and everything. So, here's some things that you probably didn't know. That the LaLaurie Mansion was home to Delphine LaLaurie, and her story is one of the most popular ghost stories on the tours of New Orleans. Um, the LaLaurie Mansion and that Delphine LaLaurie played a big part in the American Horror Story franchise, but no, the house was not. That's not where they filmed. Nicolas Cage indeed owned the house for a short time, but it's also true that he managed his money as well as he acts and no longer owns the house. Now, and also, the LaLaurie Mansion is widely considered one of the most haunted houses in New Orleans, French Quarter, and many people believe that the ghosts of former slaves are causing most of the hauntings. So, what about the ghost of this infamous house? Well, for almost 200 years, there have been reports of paranormal activity coming from this house, and it shouldn't be surprised that many hauntings are attributed to the slaves of Madame LaLaurie kept on the property. There is room in the LaLaurie mansion where slaves were often kept, and reports of moaning coming from the rooms are common. Now, phantom footsteps echo through the house with regularity, and many people have stood near the house and have reported feeling as if they have been taken over by negative energy. Now, the house is even said to be haunted today. Now, despite all the ghost stories and paranormal activities at the house, it would be folly to assume that all of them could be traced back to Madame LaLaurie and her mistreatment of slaves. In 1894, a tenant who lived in the LaLaurie mansion was brutally murdered in his room, and they found his belongings ransacked as if someone had gone through him. The police assumed that he had been a victim of a robbery, and even though nothing of value had gone missing, an interesting account regarding the murder details. When the police interview him, neighbors are asked about his disappearance. One of his friends claimed that he was having a problem with his sprites in the house. Now, his friend wrote it off as his imagination running around, and that he was claiming to have problems and everything. But he did say something interesting, that he claimed that his friend told him that there was a demon in there in that house going who was going to rest until not going to rest until he had met his end. When the man died in the house, it is which the man died in the house, of course, right? But it is possible that at least some of the ghostly phenomena can be the result of this brutal murder. And it is certain, however, that nobody will know for certain until a real paranormal investigation team can go investigate the location. Only then, by communicating with the dead, who still resides there, can we actually get to the bottom line of the truth, right? Now, what about during the schoolgirl years? Believe it or not, the LaLaurie mansion for a brief time was um also a school for girls during the mid to late 19th century. And at first, it had been one of the few mixed schools in the city of New Orleans, but politics during the Reconstruction era was covulated, and surely enough, soon after the school at 1140 Wardle Street was converted into a strictly all-girls African American primary school. Within a short amount of time, reports of the physical assaults came to light, and we know that young girls would approach their teachers, tears striking them down the face with their sleeves rolled up, exposed flesh with their forearms and everything. The teachers were asked, "Who did this to you?" And they would answer their answers would all be the same, "That woman." Now, but these girls were young enough to probably not be aware of Madame Delphine and the devastating tragedy decades earlier. Moreover, it is likely that the teacher themselves would tell them 6, 7, 8 year olds about the starvation and moral torture of the slaves decades before. Now, one must wonder if the young girls were playing pranks on each other and if their claims that the phantom woman has scarred them to be true. No memoirs exist from this period, just scathing accounts here. Now, was the spirit of Madame Delphine responsible for the scratches, or was it something else entirely? Now, they did get a medium to the house, and although not everyone believes in psychics and mediums, there was one particular instance made known to the ghostly tours team that someone on one of the ghost tours happened to be a medium, and throughout the night, she had a sense of things in various locations. Before the tour guides told the story, but within the first sight of the LaLaurie mansion, it is believed that the medium sucked in a deep breath. Such sadness, she whispers as she rocked back on her heels, and pulling her phone, she proceeded to nap the picture of the mansion, the brick up window, and she went on. There was that's not where the little girl fell out of. This is where the tour guide would pause, and simply because she had gotten into part of the story about the little girl at all. Nevertheless, she recovered quickly and said, "No, you're right. The story goes that Leah fell into the courtyard, and as for a bricked up window, I suspect that there was something at home." Now you're probably wondering the next few minutes, right? Well, the medium experienced a heavy emotion like weight had been settled down on her shoulders, and she sensed the spirit of a young boy who liked to play pranks on the living, and the spirit of a little girl who was often nervous. Did she feel any helplessness of anger? The tour guide would ask. No, was her response. Whatever happened then was that LaLaurie does not visit the house any longer. Now, is this true? Have the spirits of the slaves who were once responsible of the death moved on and everything? So, what about the ghostly happenings here? Well, on one occasion, um, the guide was giving a ghost tour, and there was at a LaLaurie mansion, standing directly from the front door to their light, another group of discussing the tragedy of the LaLauries, some 50 feet away. But under a quiet moonlight, the story of 1834 was slowly unveiled. All of a sudden, the guide felt a tug on her messenger bag draped over her shoulder. She stopped him in her story, twisted um, to look to look over her shoulder, convinced that she might find a pickpocket or someone intending on stealing her. Right in the middle of the tour, she exclaimed as she um, regaled as with the story. No one was there. However, she turned back around and she got back into character. No less than 10 seconds later, there was a tug again. Harder this time, a sharp yank. Once again, she whipped around, but no one was there. This time, she told her tour that what happened in their faces and they were priceless. No doubt hers was too. Now, 2 weeks later, at the corner of Governor Nichols and Royal Street, the guide was out on the streets again, bringing another tour. In the LaLaurie mansion of the course, there was a main hit. She was positioned in a group under a set of street lamps, burnt out for weeks. She launched into the story but the minute she said the name Leia, the lamps flickered on, and everyone in the group was yet paused, a few yelping in the light. And the guy went on to show when she said the name Leia, those lamps flew out, and the light was gone. Was that the ghost of Leia still there? And everything? One has to wonder, right? So, but very interesting though. But here's the question, why are so many people intrigued by this mansion? Well, this mansion can be spotted around snapping photos in the buildings of any given night, um, and everything. Like, it's very curious, like, and here's the thing, let's talk about the McCarthy clan. So Delphine was a member of the largest wealthy and political power McCarthy clan, and her family included military officers, and guests and all of that. Now her first child was Louis Cavalier. Now her first child, Louis Cavalier and Marie Leanne Laurel, was also named Louis Bartholomew, who was born in 1783 and everything. So let's talk about the marriages of Delphine, okay? On June 11, 1800, Delphine McCarthy married Don Raymond de Lopez y Aguilio, um, de la Royal de Carlos, um, at the St. Louis Cathedral, and some 4 years later, she and Don Raymond traveled to Spain, and the accounts differ as what occurred on the journey. But what we do know is that Don Raymond died in Havana en route to Madrid, and Delphine Delphine was not the only one, was not with him when he passed, but during the voyage, Delphine gave birth to a daughter. She named her Maria Borgio Delphine Lopez. And I'm not repeating all that again, y'all. That's just a lot of names. But anyway, her second marriage was to John Blanc, a man who carried many titles, including banker, merchant, lawyer, and legislator. They were get married in 1808, and after their reunion, John Blanc bought out the property at 409 Royal Street and everything. But it was her third and final marriage in 1825 that would cause the most controversy. Leonard Louis Nicolas LaLaurie was a transplant from France, and he was a physician, though today he would have been considered a chiropractor, and their meeting was not pure luck. One of Delphine's daughters from her second marriage had some deformities along her spine, and he was hired to cure the girl, and Louis Laurie used all sorts of medical equipment, and that looked quite torturous. Delphine's daughter did not get better, but Delphine was enamored by the physician, and she was nearly 20 years older, and letters show that Laurie departed New Orleans for France, and that it was his brother who persuaded him to return. After all, Louis had impregnated Delphine, and nothing else could be done about this. In 1831, Delphine purchased a property at 1140 Royal Street, where she would live with her LaLaurie and two of her children. But the marriage was not a happy one. Neighbors overheard the couples arguing all the time, and it was almost unsurprisingly to them that Louis LaLaurie packed the bags and moved out sometime in the months of 1834. Now, losing her husband um, reportedly drove her mad, and rumors would begin to spread that she was harming her slaves. And in an incident in 1833, when a young man within the household, Leia fell to her death in the courtyard and turned all the lights on Maria Delphine McCarty. LaLaurie, and the council held an investigation, and all of the slaves were set free. One by one, Delphine purchased them all back. The events were quite 1140 Royal Street were quiet until that fateful night in 1834. So you're probably wondering, what happened on this very night? I know I am, right? Well, on the morning of April 10th, 1834, a fire would break out in a luxurious um luxurious house that was owned by Delphine LaLaurie, and the fire destroyed and part of the house and brought to light seven slaves who were starved, tortured, and chained in the upper part of the building. They were nearly helpless and were carried to the Gabrua, where they were treated medical treatment, food, and drink. Nearly 200,000 town people came to view the victims, and they were appalled by their sight before them. And the people began gathering at the LaLaurie mansion the expectation. Oh, at the expectation now that the sheriff would arrest Delphine. However, the sheriff would never arrive, and as the day went on, it became apparent that any action was not going to happen. The crowd transformed into a mob, which was only one thought: vengeance. Now, when Madame LaLaurie managed to escape the fray, the enraged crowd um, attacked the now empty residence, and so it's now empty residence, and they stripped the interior of the valuables and continued the assault by trying to dismantle the whole house and damaging the walls of the roof. Now, by the next morning, they had nearly demolished the entire house. Details of the fire and the aftermath, as reported by eyewitnesses, emerged in the local newspapers during the following week. Now, the account was soon picked up by a national newspaper, and Madame LaLaurie was reviled as a monster and a demon to fear and escape from hell. So, the fire was ignited in the kitchen was of the grand mansion, and allegedly the fire started on to propose a slave woman chained to a stove for punishment, and the fire seemed to attempt to be calling attention to the deplorable conditions and everything. So, with that being said, um, many of the stories told by the LaLaurie mansion involve slaves being found under extreme conditions and everything. And one version begins with the conditions that the slaves found when authorities arrived. That the story says that one of the slaves had their bones broken numerous times, and they set unnatural positions so that when she moved, her limbs remained crooked and bent, and her gout reminiscent of of a crab. And another slave was said to have like this hole drilled in her head with a wooden spoon sticking out, with an obvious attempt to stir the brains of the poor soul. Now, allegedly, a different person had their skin peeled back and to expose the tissue and muscle of the naked eye. Now, the stories also claim that another person had his intestines removed from his body and wrapped around his naked waist. Others, covered with honey and black ants, lived and tortured, as the legend goes to the lucky ones that were found dead. Now, here's the thing: is this hearsay or fact? Well, um, many stories and exaggerations can be traced back to books written on commentaries. Well, after the fire broke out, and the more gruesome stories are renditions told in Janine Delevingne's *The Haunted House*, which I do recommend. Anyway, Delavine claimed to have come upon this information from old newspaper accounts, interviews, and neighborhood hearsay. And she also declared that when the house was sold, workers were known to rebuilding the house. They uncovered numerous human skeletons beneath the house in all sorts of positions. Helter Skelter, belly covered with soul, shreds, and all of that. But here's the thing. The gruesome tales are simply a product of the 20th century, maybe, right? Well, we don't know that for sure, are they? Well, in truth, they extend back to the same year as the devastating fire. While other newspapers in the area said that the slaves were kept in poor conditions, the New Orleans Bee newspaper took it many steps further by saying basically that the slaves were tortured and some of them appeared to be medical experiments. There were a few things to consider about the coverage of the LaLaurie mansion and events. First, they were the only newspaper to include stories about the torture of slaves being mutilated. Their reputation in the 1830s could be likened to the reputation of the National Enquirer today, where Bigfoot and aliens are main spread. And historians argue that these articles about the fire, um, that the slaves in the Lolaroos were based on information obtained by hearsay. Now there was an informant Monsieur Montreal, that spawned a neighbor of Madame LaLaurie, and that they lived next door to the LaLauries at the time the fire broke out, and before that, um, Montreal suffered an unfortunate bout of unrequited love for Delphine LaLaurie, and it was documented by reporters interviewing people after the fire that he had made advances toward her for years. And he comforted her, no doubt, by speaking of Delphine in a derogatory manner. Um, Now, in the Sunday section of New Orleans Times, on February 4th, 1934, much of the information was brought to light by Mix Frost and everything. Now, let's get to it. It's the history of the LaLaurie mansion, as bad as the legend. Okay, the truth about Madame LaLaurie is that the house that sits here today, there today, to start, is that we can certainly throw out any accounts of slaves for medical experiments, and also, almost all of the stories don't even show up until the 1940s and everything. Now, what happened to Madame Delphine, if you're probably wondering? Well, many ghost tour guides were asked this, and whatever happened to her. Well, after she left New Orleans, we all know she went back to France. Her ship docked in Mobile before continuing the journey to Paris. Her death shrouded in mystery, just like her life was. One popular account details her death while hunting for. That's very unlikely. Other stories report that returning to New Orleans later in life under a assumed name, many historians widely discount the story. There is a reason to believe that she could have, according to some, the blank tomb in St. Louis Cemetery holds her body and everything. Now, what about the mansion today? Well, despite nearly 2 centuries that have passed since 1834, the events of that year are still told today, and they only occurred like just yesterday. Facts respond into tales and brutality and torture upon the truth and everything. Now, where is the LaLaurie mansion? Is the curse real at the LaLaurie mansion? On the New Orleans Ghost Tour guides, you will hear the entire story, which I think is pretty neat right there. And if I ever go to New Orleans, I want to hear the story more. Like, I want to know, like, but yes, I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.